Okay, welcome to video number 51 of the Diaries of a Coronavirologist YouTube channel. Today is the 28th of January and we are now over 100 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world, and we're getting close to 2.2 million confirmed deaths. So for my little recap of this time last year in Corona, we have a lot of countries announcing their first cases. So this being the week of January the 25th, there's a lot of different places this time last year that had their first cases. So I made a list so I get them all, I think, all of them. So there's Australia, Canada, Germany, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Finland, India, the Philippines, Russia, Italy, and the UK all reported their first cases of COVID-19 at this time last year. There were also an increasing number of travel bans being placed towards China, so traveling in and out of China, and people were removing diplomats from Wuhan. And on the 30th of January, coming up in a few days' time, this time last year, the WHO announced COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 as a public health emergency of international concern, a PHEIC. PHEIC. So it was just a little recap for what was going on this time last year, and a reminder of how far we've come in a year for all of this to now over 100 million confirmed cases. So I wasn't really going to do a video this week. I was going to have a week off, but Novavax have just put out some pretty interesting data from their phase 3 clinical trial and phase 2B trial for their vaccine candidates that's being run in the UK and South Africa. Last week, I talked about vaccines and variants and talked about some of the lab-based studies that suggested maybe the variants are going to be at least some level of resistance to antibodies produced by vaccines. So now, because we have Novavax data from the UK, where we have the UK variant B1.1.7, and South Africa, where we have the South Africa variant B1.351, we now have some actual real-world data. So in this video, I'm going to take a look at the data that's been put out by Novavax, looking at their efficacy in these two different regions. And then in the second part, I'm going to talk more about the link between the lab-based science and the real-world data that we now have, because this could be really useful. So I'll take a bigger dive into talking about neutralisation assays and how what we learn in the lab might correlate to what we can find in people, and how this data from Novavax could be useful. As with all the videos, I've got the timestamps for different sections to this down below, so you can get an overview of the whole video. Now, Novavax are a company that we here in the lab have worked quite closely with on the development of their vaccine candidates. So we've been involved in some of the preclinical work and some of the early stages of the clinical research, so we are on papers with them. We aren't involved with this research, the phase 3 work, but obviously because we have this connection to it, I'm always curious to see what is going on with the Novavax vaccine, and I obviously want to see it find its way to approval. I want it to be shown to be safe and effective because we were connected with it, so that's very exciting for us. And just to put in a quick disclaimer here, even though I've been involved with some of the early stages of this research, so some of the preclinical and some of the phase 1 and 2 clinical sides of things, I do not have any financial interests in Novavax. I own no stock or anything like that, and I'm not promoting one vaccine over another. My interest and excitement really just comes from a personal standpoint of something I helped to study in a lab here in Baltimore may get approval for use as a vaccine in humans, and therefore something I've helped with could be beneficial to people around the world, and that's quite exciting and awesome. I've previously talked about that vaccine in a different video on this channel, back at video number 31, and I'll link to that down below in the description for this video if you want to go back. So I'm not really going to do a big recap on that vaccine. Now, that video is the one to go to find out more details about it. But just briefly, it's a subunit vaccine, so it's slightly different to the ones that are already approved from Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. So those are 2 mRNA and 1 adenovirus-based vaccines, and those are largely new technologies where your body produces the spike protein to immunize you with spike. A subunit vaccine is slightly different in that the spike protein is made in the lab in insect cells, and a small particle is put together that the spike sticks out of, so it looks much like a virus but with nothing other than the spike protein, and that's what's injected into you to stimulate the immune response. So your body isn't producing the spike, that actually goes in as the vaccine. And there are other vaccines that use this kind of technology. So, for example, the hepatitis B vaccine or the HPV vaccine, Cervarix, for example, they are both subunit vaccines. So this is already a tried and trusted technology for vaccine delivery, unlike the new technologies that are being produced in the other vaccines. Some point soon, I do intend to make a video to break down all the different categories of vaccines that are being trialed for COVID-19, because pretty much every vaccine possibility is being tested. But that's going to be a different video for a different time. Tonight, I just really want to keep focused on the data that Novavax have announced today. But just before I move on to that data, I want to say that this vaccine candidate's official designation, the official name is NVX-CoV-2373. The reason I'm pointing this out is it got brought to my attention in some comments on one of my other videos that in all of the published data, so the peer-reviewed science on these vaccines, so be that Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Novavax, Johnson & Johnson, whoever it may be, they all use those official designators. So if you're trying to find the studies on these vaccines, it can be hard unless you know these official designations. So for example, the Pfizer vaccine is BNT16B2, and the Moderna vaccine is mRNA 1273. So I just want to start trying to point these out so that if you want to, you can go and find the other studies on all of these vaccines, the preclinical and the early clinical studies that are out there. So this vaccine, as I say, is NVX-CoV-2373. And if you put that into Google, or at least my Google, the first link that came up for me was the New England Journal of Medicine article published on the 10th of December 2020, which is their phase 1/2 clinical trial data, which is the stuff, well, one of the papers that we're on with Novavax, for example. So just to put some evidence for the fact that we are involved with this research in times. And that brings me to the data that was put out today by Novavax in a press release. So it's all press release, it's not peer-reviewed science yet. Hopefully that will come sooner rather than later. But it's for their ongoing phase 3 and phase 2B trials. So the phase 3 trial is being performed in the UK, and they've got 15,000 people enrolled in that trial there. The phase 2B is being performed in South Africa, and in that there are 4,400 people. So these are obviously two very good places to be doing trials right now because of the UK variant B1.1.7 and the South Africa variant B1.351, which seem to be more transmissible, and there's fears that they may escape vaccine protection, or at least may be able to reinfect people who've already had COVID once. So the data that's been put out from this press release is mostly very good. There's some concern, but for the most part, it is really good data to see. In the UK data, the vaccine is showing about 89% efficacy. So once again, this is based on the number of people who develop symptomatic COVID-19 in the placebo group versus the number of people who develop symptomatic COVID-19 in the vaccine group. So the total number of cases they're reporting at this interim stage while the trial is ongoing is 62 total symptomatic COVID cases. And the 89% efficacy comes from the fact that only 6 people in the vaccine group developed symptomatic COVID, while the other 56 were all in the placebo group. So this is great because it puts it right up there at similar levels of efficacy to the AstraZeneca, Pfizer and Moderna vaccines in terms of protecting from developing symptomatic COVID. And as ever, the more vaccines we have that are effective and safe, the more options we have to vaccinate people with. So the more people we can get vaccinated in total. So this is all good news. What's also great from the UK data is that the vaccine appears to be effective against the UK variant B1.1.7. So out of those 62 total cases that are being reported on, 32 of those were from the UK variant B1.1.7. In that subsection of cases, 28 were in the placebo group and only 4 were in the vaccine group. So this is 86% efficacy. So there's not really that much of a drop-off from their overall count from the 62 people down to just the UK variant. So 89 down to 86 is a wash pretty much. So it doesn't look like the UK variant is escaping protection from this vaccine, which is really great to see. I will though stress that obviously these are low case counts still. We want to be seeing closer to 150 and more to really solidify this data, similarly to what was reported by the likes of Pfizer and Moderna. But right now, this is promising data to see for Novavax in the UK. So this then takes me to South Africa, where the data is a little bit more concerning, or at least not quite so promising, but it's not disastrous. So from the South African study, the efficacy seems to be around 60%, so not as high as the 89 reported in the UK, down at 60%. That's taken from 44 HIV negative patients in this study. So this is their phase 2B, 4,400 total, as I said earlier in the video. And they're seeing 60% protection within that 44, meaning that there were 29 people in the placebo group who developed symptomatic COVID and only 15 in those who received the vaccine. Overall, in their trial, they say that their vaccine is 49% effective when you include HIV positive people. So I'm guessing it doesn't really work in the HIV people. I didn't see in their press release a total number of HIV positive people. So, but being that it's dropped from 60% to 49%, I'm guessing there are a few, and I'm guessing that it didn't work very well in them. But that isn't too surprising because HIV does compromise the immune system. Now, there could be a lot of variables, and there probably are a lot of variables that could impact why this vaccine is at 89% efficacy in the UK and only 60% in South Africa. But one that's very easy to test, or relatively easy to test, is the fact that there's the South Africa variant spreading. So out of those 44 cases that have COVID-19 so far, Novavax have managed to sequence 27 of those patients' viruses that are spreading in them. And out of those 27, 25 have been found to be of the South African variant, B1.351. So it looks like nearly all of the cases that they are getting in South Africa are of this South African variant. So this potentially points towards the vaccine being less effective against the South African variant. But still at 60%, this isn't disastrous news. I've said it before on the channel, but it bears repeating now, that 50% was going to be a level at which vaccines would be approved against SARS-CoV-2. The flu vaccine, if we get 60% protection from that, that's a good year for the vaccine against flu. So while we'd love to see 89, 90, 100% protection against all the variants of this virus, to have 60% against the South Africa variant, it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. So there's more promising news coming from this data from Novavax. So overall, this is great data to see from Novavax. It looks like it's effective in the UK and against the UK variant. It's not great to see that there seems to be a drop-off in efficacy against the South African variant, but still at 60% efficacy, this is still pretty decent. It's definitely better than 0%. So while less encouraging, it's not the end of the world. And overall, I think this is a day of good data from Novavax, and it's great to see. I hope they continue to collect data, though, and I hope they really solidify this data with higher case counts before they start to look for emergency usage approvals, getting up to sort of the 150 cases that were kind of the mark used by the likes of Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca. Obviously, I'd love to see no more cases, but that's not really a reality. So let's get more solid data before we go for these emergency usage approvals. And that's all I've got to say about the Novavax press release data. Looks great in the UK, high efficacy, and it seems to be still inhibiting infection from the UK variant. Slightly more concerning in South Africa, but not devastating data for sure. At 60%, that's still definitely beneficial. But I want to shift gears a little bit for the remainder of the video here and talk a little bit more about the lab studies, because what's really useful here from the Novavax data is we now have a way to try and link the kind of things we do in the lab with what's going on in the real world. In my video last week, I talked about vaccines and these variants and some of the lab-based work that was being done to try and assess whether these variants were less sensitive to antibodies from people who'd either been infected with and developed COVID-19 before, or people who'd received the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. So now we have some real data from people getting the Novavax vaccine, and we have an idea that maybe the South Africa variant is less impacted by the vaccine in this case. So now we can start to use that to actually better understand how the stuff in the lab correlates with the real world. And this could be really beneficial moving. So the way that the level of antibody is assessed in people is generally through a neutralisation assay. I talked about this in the video last week. So here, the idea is that if you take serum samples that have antibody from someone who receives a vaccine, there's going to be a lot of antibody in that can bind to the virus and stop its ability of infecting cells in the lab and killing those cells. So you no longer see the cells die, and you neutralise the ability of the virus to kill the cells. So what we do for these neutralisation assays is we dilute out that serum sample in something that doesn't have antibody lots and lots of times. So it might be a 1 in 3 dilution, which you just keep doing iteratively. So it goes to 1 in 3, 1 in 9, 1 in 27, so on and so forth, until you hit a point where you no longer block the ability of the virus to infect cells. So this is how you develop these comparative levels of how much antibody is in your first sample. So let's use just an example. Maybe we can take some serum sample from someone who received the Novavax vaccine, and you may find that you have to dilute it 50,000-fold before you see a loss of the protection provided by that, so the loss of neutralization of the ability of the virus to infect cells. So the kind of data that was put out, and I talked about in the video last week, suggested that these variants were somewhat resistant and could escape that level of neutralization that was seen against the original virus. So for example, and these are just make-up numbers, perhaps instead of diluting your sample 50,000 times, when you use the UK variant, you only get to 25,000 dilution before the virus can infect the cells. So this means it's 2-fold less effective at inhibiting the virus. So that's the kind of thing we can start to do in the lab. We have access to these variants, and we can probably get hold of serum samples from people who've received the Novavax vaccine. Why that's going to be useful is because that 50,000 hypothetical number, that could be massive overkill. That may be so high that even a loss of neutralization in the lab doesn't actually correlate to a loss of protection in people. So my example there, that you go from the 50,000 to the 20,000, 25,000 level, sorry if I said 20,000 at any point, 25,000 level for the UK variant, that may not matter because, as the data in the people put out by Novavax today suggests, it still protects against the UK variant in the real world in people. So that's useful information for us. Then if we bring in, say, the South Africa variant, what we may find in the lab and what we look and see is maybe that goes only to a 5,000 level. So it's a 10-fold drop compared to the neutralization level against the original virus. So maybe that 5,000 level is where you start to see loss of efficacy of the vaccine. Now, this is all hypothetical stuff I'm talking about here, and those different numbers are all made up. That's not based on anything we've done in the lab. But we have no idea what these kind of neutralization numbers mean in terms of protection in people. So now that we have this data from Novavax about people who've got the South African variant and the fact that it seems to be less effective against that, and people who have the UK variant and it seems to be similarly effective against that, we can start to try and better understand the level of antibody that is important. Therefore, moving forward, when new variants emerge, which they will, we can hopefully get an idea of where they may be on this spectrum. So between the 50,000 and the 5,000, where we know we start to lose efficacy, maybe we don't need to worry about the things in the 25 to 30,000 area, but we need to worry about things that are lower than the 5,000. So it's great to have some real world data. So that was a long-winded way of me saying some real world data from people is great, because now the stuff we do in the lab, it starts to have a little bit more meaning, or in this loosely correlated sense. And that's obviously going to be important because, I say, new variants will emerge. We're seeing them now, and unless we really start to bring cases down in every part of the world where the coronavirus is spreading, we will continue to get variants, and we want our vaccines to be effective against those. My final little thing to point out is that Novavax are working on producing variants of their vaccine to the variants of the virus that have emerged. So the idea here is that they're going to change the sequence of the spike protein on their vaccine to match the sequence of the spike protein on the variants. So it'd be like the UK or the South Africa variant. And then the idea would be to give those as booster shots. Obviously, that will have to go through all the trials and all the regulatory steps, but the idea might be that in future we could have something that is more effective against the South Africa variant. And that's potentially stuff that we may help with here. I don't know yet, haven't heard, but we would do those kind of studies I was just talking about. Is this more effective? So the 5,000 idea I was just talking about, maybe that's the South Africa variant against the original vaccine. When we get their variant vaccine, maybe that shifts it all the way back to 50,000. Who knows? That's all part of the science that maybe we'll be lucky enough to do, but if not us, then definitely other people will do. Anyway, I thought I'd get this out there to be timely with Novavax putting out the press release data as they have done today, just to talk about it on the channel. I think I mentioned this in video number 31 when I previously talked about the Novavax vaccine, but they are anticipating that they can make enough vaccine doses to vaccinate 1 billion people by the end of 2021. So if we add this to all the other doses of the Pfizer, Moderna and AstraZeneca vaccine that are already being given to people, we're starting to really get some good numbers, and that's really promising moving through 2021 and then into 2020. So that's great to see, and hopefully these numbers hold true or even improve. We can be hopeful, right? And therefore we may have another vaccine soon. With all that said, thank you for watching. If you found the video useful and interesting, please drop a like for the YouTube metrics. If you've got questions and comments, please leave them down below and I'll do my best to get to them. If you're new around here and you like the video, please subscribe so you get new ones. I try and put one out roughly every week, maybe 3 out of 4 weeks is kind of my goal moving forward. And as always, please stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask, and keep calm and carry on. We will get through this pandemic.